Here are the 10 most terrifying places in the world. Number 10. Poveglia, Italy. Poveglia is a small island located between Venice and Lido in the Venetian lagoon of northern Italy. A small canal divides the island into two separate parts. The island first appears in the historical record in 421, and was populated until the residents fled warfare in 1379. For more than 100 years beginning in 1776, the island was used as a quarantine station for those suffering the plague and other diseases, and later as a mental hospital. The mental hospital closed in 1968, and the island has been vacant ever since. Because of its history, the island is frequently featured on paranormal shows. Visits to the island are prohibited, but various books and articles report on visits by writers and/or photographers. Believers in the paranormal have claimed that Poveglia is the most haunted island, or the most haunted place in the world. Some time after the island had become a quarantine station for ships arriving at Venice in the 18th century, a plague was discovered on two ships. The island was sealed off and used to host people with infectious diseases, leading to legends of terminally ill Venetians waiting to die before their ghosts returned to haunt the island. A doctor allegedly experimented on patients with crude lobotomies. According to a 2014 report by the Travel Channel, the doctor jumped from the bell tower in the 1930s after claiming he had been driven mad by ghosts. He later died. Decades later, nearby residents claimed to still hear the bell, although it was removed many years earlier. That report, titled Haunted History, also states that some restoration work had started recently, but that abruptly stopped, without explanation. The island has been featured on the paranormal shows Ghost Adventures and Scariest Places on Earth. It has been explored and featured by Shii the YouTuber, and was featured on a video by Yesfiri in 2019. In 2023, the island was explored by Darata, the Irish YouTuber, who stayed on the island overnight, exploring the abandoned bell tower to search for traces of paranormal activities. His mission somewhat succeeded, after he received some words in Italian on the radio including "leave," "incident," and "exploded," but he denied the existence of any ghosts. Number 9. The Cuban Club. Tampa, Florida. El Circulo Cubano de Tampa, also known as the Cuban Club, is an American historic building constructed in 1917 to replace an earlier structure on the same site that burned down, to serve as a gathering place for Cuban immigrants in Ybor City, Tampa, Florida. It was designed by Tampa architect M. Leo Elliott. It is located at Palm Avenue and 14th Street. On November 15, 1972, it was added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. On April 18, 2012, the AIA's Florida chapter placed the building on its list of Florida architecture. The building has a theater and once included a bowling alley, spa, pharmacy, ballroom, library, and cantina. Decorated with imported tile, stained glass, sgraffito spandrels and murals, it continues the legacy of the club, first established in 1902 as a mutual aid society. Late 19th and 20th century Cuban immigration to the United States was impressive for the craft talents brought to the country. Along with their Spanish counterparts, skilled Cuban cigar makers made Tampa's hand-rolled cigars world famous. As early as 1899, Cuban immigrants formed recreational societies with varying degrees of success, and in 1902 Cuban workers founded El Circulo Cubano, which means Circle of Cubans. It was a mutual aid society to bind all Cuban residents to Tampa into a fraternal group, to offer assistance and help to the sick. The club provided a gathering place for members and served as a unifying force in the Cuban community. Number 8. Gettysburg Battlefield, Pennsylvania. The Battle of Gettysburg was a three-day battle in the American Civil War fought between Union and Confederate forces between July 1 and July 3, 1863, in and around Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The battle, which was won by the Union, is widely considered the Civil War turning point, ending the Confederacy's aspirations to establish an independent nation. It was the Civil War's bloodiest battle, claiming over 50,000 combined casualties over 3 days. In the Battle of Gettysburg, Union Major General George Meade's Army of the Potomac defeated attacks by Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, halting Lee's invasion of the North and forcing his retreat. Number 7. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia. Eastern State Penitentiary was once the most famous and expensive prison in the world, but stands today in ruin, a haunting world of crumbling cell blocks and empty guard towers. Its vaulted skyly cells held nearly 85,000 people over its long history, including bank robber Slick Willie Sutton and Scarface Al Capone. The Eastern State Penitentiary, ESP, is a former American prison in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It is located in the Fairmount section of the city, and was operational from 1829 until 1971. The penitentiary refined the revolutionary system of separate incarceration, first pioneered at the Walnut Street Jail, which emphasized principles of reform rather than punishment. Notorious criminals such as Al Capone and bank robber Willie Sutton were held inside its innovative wagon wheel design. For their role in the Caleres Massacre of 1934, James Bruno, Big Joe, and several male relatives were incarcerated here between 1936 and 1948, before they were paroled. At its completion, the building was the largest and most expensive public structure ever erected in the United States, and quickly became a model for more than 300 prisons worldwide. The prison is currently a U.S. National Historic Landmark, which is open to the public as a museum for tours 6 days a week, 12 months a year, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Number 6. The Myrtles Plantation, USA. Myrtles Plantation is a historic home and former antebellum plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, United States, built in 1796. It is often reported that 10 murders occurred in the house, but historical records only indicate the murder of William Winter. In 2001, Unsolved Mysteries filmed a segment about the alleged hauntings at the plantation. The Myrtles was also featured on a 2005 episode of Ghost Hunters. Now about the legend of Chloe. Possibly the most well-known of the Myrtles' supposed ghosts, Chloe was reportedly a slave owned by Clark and Sarah Woodruff. According to one story, Clark Woodruff had pressured or forced Chloe into being his mistress. Other versions of the legend have Chloe listening in at keyholes to learn news of Clark Woodruff's business dealings or for other purposes. After being caught, either by Clark or Sarah Woodruff, one of her ears was cut off, and she wore a green turban to hide it. There are a variety of other legends surrounding the Myrtles. The house is reputedly built over an Indian burial ground, and the ghost of a young Native American woman has been reported. During the Civil War, the house was ransacked by Union soldiers, and legend claims that 3 were killed in the house. Supposedly, there is a blood stain in a doorway, roughly the size of a human body, that will not, or would not, come clean. Other legends say that cleaners have been unable to push their mop or broom into that space. A mirror located in the house supposedly holds the spirits of Sarah Woodruff and 2 of her children. According to custom, mirrors are covered after a death, but legend says that after the poisoning of the Woodruffs, this particular mirror was overlooked. The uncovered mirror reportedly trapped the spirits of Sarah and her children, who are occasionally seen or leave handprints in the mirror. The plantation is also reportedly haunted by a young girl who died in 1868, despite being treated by a local voodoo practitioner. She supposedly appears in the room in which she died, and has been reported to practice voodoo on people sleeping in the room. There is also a ghost who reportedly walks, staggers, or crawls up the stairs and stops on the 17th step. Some have said that this is William Drew Winter, the victim of the only verified murder in the house. He was shot on the front porch of the main house, and according to legend, staggered or crawled up the stairs, but collapsed dead, on the 17th step. Alternate versions of his murder claim he managed to crawl up the stairs, and collapsed in his wife's arms on the 17th step. However, this version of the story is contested. Number 5. The Tower of London, United Kingdom. Tower of London is a historic castle on the north bank of the River Thames in central London, England. It lies within the London borough of Tower Hamlets, which is separated from the eastern edge of the square mile of the City of London by the open space known as Tower Hill. It was founded toward the end of 1066 as part of the Norman conquest. The White Tower, which gives the entire castle its name, was built by William the Conqueror in 1078 and was initially a resented symbol of oppression inflicted upon London by the new Norman ruling class. The castle was also used as a prison from 1100 until 1952, although that was not its primary purpose. A grand palace early in its history, it served as a royal residence. As a whole, the tower is a complex of several buildings set within two concentric rings of defensive walls and a moat. There were several phases of expansion, mainly under Kings Richard I, Henry III, and Edward I in the 12th and 13th centuries. The general layout established by the late 13th century remains despite later activity on the site. As the most secure castle in the land, the tower guarded royal possessions and even the royal family in times of war and rebellion. But for 500 years, monarchs also used the tower as a surprisingly luxurious palace. Throughout history, the tower has also been a visible symbol of awe and fear. Kings and queens imprisoned their rivals and enemies within its walls. The stories of prisoners, rich and poor, still haunt the tower. Number 4, Castle of Good Hope, South Africa. The Castle of Good Hope is known locally as the Castle of Good Hope is a bastion fort built in the 17th century in Cape Town, South Africa. The castle was originally located on the coastline of Table Bay, but following reclamation, the fort is now located a short distance inland within the central business district. The castle was declared a historical monument, now a provincial heritage site, in 1936. Following restoration work in the 1980s, it is considered the best preserved example of a 17th century architectural structure in the entire world. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company, DEIC, settled on the shores of Table Bay to establish a refreshment base for ships en route from Europe to East Asia, and to maintain its monopoly over the spice trade. Built by the DEIC between 1666 and 1679, the Castle of Good Hope is the oldest existing colonial building in South Africa. It replaced an older fort called the Fort de Goede Hoop, which was constructed from clay and timber and built by Jan van Riebeeck, the first commander of the Cape. During 1664, tensions between Britain and the Netherlands rose amid rumors of war. That same year, Commander Zacharias Wagener, successor to Jan van Riebeeck, was instructed by Commissioner Ysbrand Gosk to build a pentagonal fortress out of stone. The first stone was laid on January 2, 1666. Work was interrupted frequently because the DEIC was reluctant to spend money on the project. On April 26, 1679, the 5 bastions were named after the main titles of William III of Orange-Nassau, Lairdom to the west, with Buren, Katzenelnbogen, Nassau, and Orange clockwise from it. Number 3, the Queen Mary, California. The Queen Mary's creation and launch was nothing if not extraordinary, and her story is rich with history, elegance and grandeur. From the time her construction began in 1930 in Clydebank, Scotland, the Queen Mary was destined to stand in a class all her own. Despite suffering economic setbacks during the Great Depression, which stalled construction on the ship for several years, Cunard Line spared no expense on building the Queen Mary, which was originally known as Job Number 534. Legend has it that the board of directors at Cunard had decided to name the ship the Queen Victoria, which would have been in keeping with the tradition of Cunard ships having the IA suffix, as Mauritania, Aquitania and Berengeria. As per protocol, legend states that the Cunard directors went to ask King George his blessing of the ship's proposed name, saying, "We have decided to name our new ship after England's greatest queen," meaning Queen Victoria, the king's grandmother. Upon which the king is reported to have stated, "My wife, Queen Mary, will be delighted that you are naming the ship after her." Number 2, Edinburgh Castle, Scotland. Edinburgh Castle is one of the oldest fortified places in Europe. With a long rich history as a royal residence, military garrison, prison and fortress, it is alive with many exciting tales. When you climb Castle Hill, you will walk in the footsteps of soldiers, kings and queens, and even the odd pirate or two. Though parts of it remain in military use, the castle is now a world-famous visitor attraction. It's also an iconic part of the old and new towns of Edinburgh World Heritage Site. Edinburgh Castle is a historic castle in Edinburgh, Scotland. It stands on Castle Rock, which has been occupied by humans since at least the Iron Age. There has been a royal castle on the rock since at least the reign of Malcolm III in the 11th century, and the castle continued to be a royal residence until 1633. From the 15th century, the castle's residential role declined, and by the 17th century it was principally used as a military garrison. Its importance as a part of Scotland's national heritage was recognised increasingly from the early 19th century onwards, and various restoration programs have been carried out over the past century and a half. And number 1, the Winchester House, California. The Winchester House is an architectural wonder and historic landmark in San Jose, California, that was once the personal residence of Sarah Lockwood Pardee Winchester, the widow of William Wirt Winchester and heiress to a large portion of the Winchester. Tragedy befell Sarah. Her infant daughter died of a childhood illness, and a few years later her husband was taken from her by tuberculosis. The house became a tourist attraction 9 months after Winchester's death in 1922. The Victorian and Gothic-style mansion is renowned for its size and its architectural curiosities, and for the numerous myths and legends surrounding the structure and its former owner. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.